You giving your family everything for 2 decades, only to have them turn their backs on you in a single moment. But just when they thought they had the upper hand, I revealed a secret that turned the tables, and left my daughter-in-law green with shock. Want to know what I said that made my own son call an ambulance? Stay with me till the end, because this story is about to take a turn you'll never forget. You know, there's something sacred about Sunday dinners, isn't there? For as long as I can remember, it's been the one time of the week when the whole family comes together. No matter how busy, tired, or grumpy we might be. The smell of roast chicken wafting through the house, the clatter of dishes, the grandkids' laughter echoing down the hallway. It's the kind of chaos that makes a house a home. Or at least that's what I always believed. This particular Sunday started out just like any other. I'd spent the afternoon fussing over the meal. My famous roast chicken, buttery mashed potatoes, green beans with a hint of garlic, and of course, my homemade apple pie cooling on the windowsill. The grandkids were running circles around the living room, shrieking with delight as they played a never-ending game of tag. My son David and his wife Lisa arrived right on time, carrying a store-bought salad and a bottle of wine. Lisa never did quite get the hang of cooking, but I never held it against her. Not out loud anyway. We all gathered around the table, the air thick with the familiar blend of gravy, perfume, and just a hint of tension. You know how it is. Families always have their little undercurrents, those things left unsaid. But I brushed it off, determined to enjoy the evening. After all, what could possibly go wrong? We made it through the course with the usual chatter, school updates from the kids, a few jokes from David, and Lisa's polite but distant smiles. I noticed she kept glancing at David, her eyes darting back and forth like she was waiting for a cue. I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe she was worried about the pie. Everyone always is, but I've never burned one yet. Then, just as I was about to serve dessert, Lisa stood up. She tapped her glass with her fork, the sound ringing out like a bell. The room fell silent. Even the grandkids paused, sensing something was about to happen. David straightened in his chair, his chest puffed out with pride. I set down the pie, wiped my hands on my apron, and looked at Lisa waiting. She cleared her throat, her voice trembling just a little. "Mother-in-law," she began, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for us over the past 20 years. You opened your home to us, you paid all our expenses, and you never asked for anything in return." I felt a flush of warmth in my chest. Maybe this was her way of finally saying thank you. Maybe after all these years, she was going to acknowledge the sacrifices I'd made. I glanced at David, who was grinning from ear to ear. My heart softened. Maybe this was the moment we'd finally become a real family. But then Lisa's tone shifted. She straightened her shoulders, her eyes locking onto mine with a steely determination I'd never seen before. "While you paid all our expenses," she continued, "I saved up and bought my own house. And now, we're going to leave you here alone and cut contact forever." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The clatter of forks, the hum of conversation, even the kids' laughter, all of it faded into a stunned silence. I stared at Lisa, trying to process her words. Was this some kind of joke? A cruel prank? But the look on her face told me she was dead serious. I almost choked on my mashed potatoes. My hands started to tremble, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. I looked at David, hoping for some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. But he just sat there, beaming like he'd won the lottery, his eyes shining with pride. My own son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd supported through every hardship, was sitting there, proud of his wife for announcing they were abandoning me. I felt a wave of emotions crash over me, shock, hurt, anger, and beneath it all, a deep, aching sadness. 20 years. 20 years of opening my home, my heart, my wallet. 20 years of putting their needs before my own, of sacrificing my own comfort so they could get back on their feet. I'd watched their kids, paid their bills, cooked their meals, and never once asked for anything in return. And this was my reward. To be cast aside like yesterday's leftovers. I glanced around the table, searching for some sign of support. The grandkids looked confused, their eyes wide and uncertain. My friends always warned me that Lisa was ambitious, but I never thought she'd be so cold. I'd always tried to see the best in her, to believe that family meant something. But in that moment, I realized I'd been living in a fantasy. But here's the thing about getting older, ladies. You learn to expect the unexpected. You learn that life has a way of throwing curveballs, and sometimes, the only thing you can do is catch them and throw them right back. So, instead of breaking down or begging them to stay, I did something I never thought I'd do. I smiled. Yes, you heard me right. I looked Lisa dead in the eye, and I smiled. Because in that moment, I realized something important. I was done being the doormat. I was done letting other people dictate my happiness. If they wanted to leave, let them. If they thought they could hurt me, they were in for a surprise. "Oh honey," I thought to myself, "you have no idea what's coming next." I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and prepared myself for what was sure to be an unforgettable evening. Because if Lisa thought she was the only one with a secret, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. And as I looked around the table, at the family I'd built and the life I'd created, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: excitement. Because sometimes the end of one chapter is just the beginning of another, and I was ready to write my own story on my own terms. So as Lisa sat back down, her announcement hanging in the air like a storm cloud, I simply smirked and said, "Well, isn't that interesting? Because I have some news too." And just like that, the game was on. Have you ever been so shocked by someone's nerve that you just wanted to burst out laughing? That was me, sitting at the head of my own dinner table, watching my daughter-in-law's smug little smile as she announced their grand plan to leave me high and dry after 20 years. I could feel the tension in the room, thick as gravy, and for a split second, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But instead of letting her see me sweat, I just smirked and said, "Well, what a coincidence. I have news too." You could have heard a pin drop. Even the grandkids, who had been squabbling over the last dinner roll, froze mid, reached their little hands suspended in the air. Lisa's face, which had been so full of self-satisfaction just moments before, twisted into something between suspicion and panic. David, my son, leaned forward, his eyes wide, clearly expecting me to break down, beg them to stay, or maybe even offer to sweeten the deal. But I was done playing the martyr. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me, and looked each of them in the eye. "I sold the house last week," I said, my voice steady and clear. "The new owners move in on Monday. I'm moving to Florida with my new boyfriend. And by the way, you have 48 hours to pack." For a moment, nobody moved. It was as if time itself had stopped. Lisa's mouth fell open, her face draining of color until she looked positively green. David's jaw dropped, his eyes darting from me to Lisa and back again, as if he couldn't quite process what he was hearing. The grandkids, sensing the shift in the air, looked from their parents to me, their eyes wide with confusion and a little bit of fear. I almost felt bad for them, but then I remembered all the times I'd been the one left picking up the pieces, the one who had to be strong for everyone else. Not this time. The silence stretched on, heavy and awkward, until finally Lisa found her voice. "You sold the house," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't do that. Where are we supposed to go?" I shrugged, doing my best to keep my expression neutral, though inside I was practically giddy. "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said, echoing the same words she'd used on me so many times over the years whenever I'd asked for a little help or understanding. "After all, you've been saving up for your own place, right?" David, still in shock, reached for his phone, his hands shaking. "Mom, are you serious? You're moving to Florida, with a boyfriend?" I couldn't help but laugh at the look on his face. "Yes, David, I am. His name is Frank, and he treats me like a queen. We're going to spend our days on the beach and our nights dancing under the stars. I've spent enough years taking care of everyone else. It's time I did something for myself." Lisa looked like she might faint. But you can't just leave us here! We have nowhere to go!" "The kids." I cut her off with a wave of my hand. "The kids will be fine. You're their parents. It's your turn to take care of them. I've done my part." I could see the panic rising in her eyes, and for a brief moment, I almost relented. But then I remembered all the times I'd been taken for granted, all the sacrifices I'd made that had gone unnoticed and unappreciated. No, this was my time. David, clearly desperate, started dialing his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "You must be having some kind of breakdown. This isn't like you, Mom." I rolled my eyes, unable to suppress a chuckle. "Oh, David, I'm not having a breakdown. I'm finally waking up. And trust me, it feels wonderful." The grandkids, sensing that something big was happening, started to cry. Lisa tried to comfort them, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold them. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. They'd all have to learn to stand on their own 2 feet sooner or later. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their bright uniforms and calm voices a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in my dining room. David rushed to the door, explaining in a frantic whisper that his mother was not herself, that she was making wild decisions and needed to be checked out. The paramedics, bless their hearts, took one look at me, sitting calmly at the head of the table sipping my wine, and exchanged a knowing glance. "Mom, are you feeling all right?" one of them asked gently. I smiled and nodded. "Never better," I replied. "Just making some long, overdue changes." They checked my vitals, asked me a few questions, and after a few minutes, declared me perfectly healthy, just a little more assertive than my family was used to. As the paramedics packed up their bags and left, David and Lisa sat in stunned silence, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. I stood up, smoothed my apron, and looked around the room one last time. "You have 48 hours. I repeated, my voice firm but not unkind. "I suggest you start packing." With that, I walked out of the dining room, leaving them to process the news. As I made my way upstairs, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the expectations, the obligations, the constant pressure to put everyone else first. I was finally doing something for myself, and it felt incredible. I thought about Frank, waiting for me in Florida, and a smile spread across my face. The next chapter of my life was about to begin, and I couldn't wait to see what it held. Downstairs, I could hear Lisa and David arguing, their voices rising in panic and frustration. But I didn't let it bother me. I'd spent too many years worrying about everyone else's happiness. Now, it was my turn. As I packed my bags, I thought about all the women out there who had given everything for their families, who had put their own dreams on hold for the sake of others. I hoped my story would inspire them to take a stand, to put themselves first for once. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that it's never too late to start living the life you deserve. And as I zipped up my suitcase and looked out the window at the setting sun, I knew in my heart that I was finally, truly free. Let's be honest, ladies, who among us hasn't at least once fantasized about flipping the script and shaking things up? After 2 decades of being the family doormat, the one who always said yes, the one who picked up the pieces and paid the bills, I'll admit it felt downright delicious to finally stand up for myself. As the paramedics packed up their gear and left, assuring my son that I was in perfect health, just a little more spirited than usual, the real show began. David, still in disbelief, paced the living room, phone glued to his ear as he called every relative he could think of, hoping someone would talk sense into me. Lisa, meanwhile, was hunched over her phone, her fingers flying as she frantically Googled tenant rights, can my mother-in-law evict me, and emergency housing options. Every so often she'd shoot me a glare, as if I'd just appended her entire world, which, in a way, I suppose I had. But instead of feeling guilty, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, like a warm blanket on a chilly night. I poured myself a glass of wine, settled into my favorite armchair, and watched the chaos unfold with a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. It was almost comical, really. For so long, I'd been the one running around, making sure everyone else was comfortable, fed, and happy. I'd been the one to stay up late, worrying about bills and broken appliances, the one who always put my own needs last. But now, as I watched Lisa scroll through legal forums and David argue with his sister on speakerphone, I realized just how much I'd given, and how little it had been appreciated. I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the taste, and let myself enjoy the moment. The grandkids, sensing the tension, had retreated to their rooms, peeking out every so often to see if the grown-ups had come to their senses. I almost called them down to reassure them, but I decided against it. This was a lesson their parents needed to learn, and I wasn't about to soften the blow. Lisa finally broke the silence, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. You can't just kick us out, you know. We have rights. We've lived here for years. I raised an eyebrow, setting my wine glass down with a soft clink. You're right, Lisa. You do have rights, and I've respected them for 20 years. But the house is sold, and the new owners want to move in. I gave you 48 hours, which is more than fair under the circumstances. If you need help finding a place, I'm sure there are resources online. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. David, overhearing our exchange, stormed over, his face red with frustration. Mom, this isn't you. You're not thinking straight. You can't just abandon your family. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I saw him not as my little boy, but as a grown man who needed to take responsibility for his own life. David, I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm choosing myself for once. You and Lisa are adults. You've saved up, you have options. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. Enough, I've made my decision. I'm moving to Florida, and I'm going to enjoy the rest of my life. You'll be fine. You always land on your feet. Lisa, still scrolling, let out a frustrated sigh. There's nothing here about immediate eviction. We might have more time than you think. I shrugged, unconcerned. Take it up with the new owners. I'm sure they'll be happy to discuss it with you on Monday. The look on her face was priceless. A mix of disbelief, outrage, and if I'm being honest, a little bit of respect. Maybe, just maybe, she realized that I wasn't the pushover she'd always thought I was. As the evening wore on, the mood in the house shifted from shock to resignation. David and Lisa retreated to their room, no doubt plotting their next move, while I finished my wine and started making a list of things I wanted to do in Florida. For the first time in years, my mind was filled not with worries and obligations, but with dreams and possibilities. I thought about long walks on the beach, lazy afternoons in the sun, and evenings spent dancing with Frank. I thought about all the things I'd put off, all the adventures I'd never had because I was too busy taking care of everyone else. And I realized, with a sense of joy I hadn't felt in decades, that my life was finally my own. The next morning, I woke up early, the house unusually quiet. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch, watching the sun rise over the neighborhood I'd called home for so long. I felt a pang of nostalgia, but it was quickly replaced by excitement. Change is never easy, but sometimes it's exactly what we need. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about all the women out there who were still waiting for permission to put themselves first, who were still sacrificing their own happiness for the sake of others. I hoped my story would inspire them to take a stand, to remember that it's never too late to start living for yourself. Inside, I could hear David and Lisa packing, their voices low and tense. I knew it wouldn't be easy for them, but I also knew it was necessary. They needed to learn that life doesn't always go according to plan, and that sometimes, the best thing you can do is roll with the punches and make the most of what you have. As for me, I was ready for whatever came next. No more paying their bills. No more cleaning up after everyone. No more being taken for granted. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. And as I watched the sun climb higher in the sky, I knew that the best was yet to come. So what happened next, you ask? Well, let me tell you, the days that followed were a whirlwind, equal parts chaos, relief, and, dare I say, a little bit of sweet satisfaction. David and Lisa, after their initial shock wore off, scrambled to find a place to stay. Turns out, saving up for a house is one thing, but actually having a roof over your head tonight is another matter entirely. I watched as they packed up their things, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. There were frantic phone calls to realtors, desperate texts to friends, and a few heated arguments behind closed doors. The grandkids, bless their hearts, seemed to take it all in stride, more excited about the prospect of a new adventure than worried about the upheaval. I made sure to give them extra hugs and reassurances, telling them that Grandma would always be just a phone call away, no matter where she lived. And as I watched my son and his wife finally take responsibility for their own lives, I felt a strange mix of pride and relief. For years, I'd carried the weight of their struggles on my shoulders, always stepping in to fix things, to smooth over the rough patches, to make sure everyone was comfortable and cared for. But now, as they loaded the last of their boxes into the car, I realized that letting go was the best thing I could have done, for all of us. As for me, well, I packed my own bags, but this time, it wasn't with a heavy heart or a sense of duty. No, this time I was filled with excitement and anticipation. I booked a one-way ticket to Florida, where Frank was waiting for me with open arms and a big, goofy grin. The moment I stepped off that plane and felt the warm, salty breeze on my face, I knew I'd made the right decision. Frank greeted me at the airport with a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite, and a promise that the best was yet to come. We spent our days exploring the coast, trying new restaurants, and dancing under the stars. I found myself laughing more, sleeping better, and waking up each morning with a sense of purpose and joy I hadn't felt in years. I even took up painting again, something I'd given up long ago when life got too busy. Frank encouraged me every step of the way, always reminding me that it was never too late to chase my dreams. And you know what, he was right. Back home, David and Lisa eventually found a small apartment not too far from where they'd always wanted to live. It wasn't the dream house they'd been saving for, but it was theirs, and they learned to make it a home. They started budgeting, cooking their own meals, and for the first time, truly working together as a team. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of bumps along the way, but I could see them growing, both as individuals and as a couple. The grandkids adjusted quickly, making new friends and settling into their new routines. And while I missed them dearly, our phone calls and video chats became something I looked forward to, rather than a source of stress or obligation. We laughed, shared stories, and made plans for future visits. I realized that distance didn't have to mean disconnection. In fact, it gave us all the space we needed to appreciate each other more. Looking back, I can honestly say that taking control of my own happiness was the best decision I ever made. For so long, I'd let fear and guilt dictate my choices, always putting everyone else's needs ahead of my own. But life is too short to live for someone else's comfort. We all deserve a chance to write our own story, to chase our own dreams, and to find joy in the everyday moments. I know it's not always easy, change can be scary, and letting go can feel like the hardest thing in the world. But sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to put yourself first, to trust that the people you love will find their own way, and to believe that you're worthy of happiness too. So, here's my question for you. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you let your family walk all over you? Or would you finally take control of your own happiness? I hope my story inspires you to choose yourself, to take that leap of faith, and to remember that it's never too late for a new beginning. Whether it's moving to a new city, picking up an old hobby, or simply saying no. For the first time in years, I encourage you to listen to your heart and do what's right for you. Because at the end of the day, we only get one life, and it's up to us to make it count. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join our community of strong, savvy women who know their worth. And tell me in the comments, what's the boldest thing you've ever done for yourself? Let's inspire each other to live our best lives, one brave step at a time.